And if you didn't get your reality and ego checked before, it's going to get checked now. I was on a high of things are going well. And then I came I was, again, a nobody. And I was definitely not the top of the nobodies. And it felt like, okay, I got to figure out what I want.
Welcome back to the Provider Pulse series of the Ethnomed podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Duncan Reed, a primary care physician at Harborview's International Medicine Clinic and medical director of Ethnomed. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you haven't listened to part 1, we suggest you listen to it first. In part 1, we followed Ayman Youssef from a childhood of not fitting in, to Egyptian for one world, not Egyptian enough for another, through a chaotic undergraduate career at the University of Houston, to the moment he sat down to write his medical school application and realized, for the first time, that medicine might actually make sense for him. He got in. He was on the island, Galveston, Texas, home of the University of Texas Medical Branch. And he arrived with the same approach he'd carried through every new environment. Be authentic and find your people. But medical school had its own version of the belonging problem. And the path from there to here, to Harborview, to chief residency, to the work that we heard him describe in episode 1, took more turns than he expected. How was medical school? So you worked very hard in undergrad. In terms of the workload, in terms of academically, how did it compare to what you had been through?
I think med school, when you get through the pre-med and the undergrad part, the fog kind of clears up a little bit. The path is a little bit more clear. Okay, this is the focus.
And everyone's taking the same classes, at least.
Everyone's doing the same thing, different interests. There's still different paths along the way, but everyone's doing the same thing, which can kind of strip some of that identity because everyone's just all doing the same thing all at the same time. And you're also surrounded by people that are good at school and very intelligent, very sharp, very talented in a lot of different ways. Now you're surrounded by a high concentration of people. And if you didn't get your reality and ego checked before, it's going to get checked now. For some people, it still doesn't, but your time is going to come. Everyone's time is going to come at one point or another. And definitely for me, I was on a high of things are going well and I'm working hard. And then I came I was, again, a nobody. And definitely amongst nobodies, I was definitely not the top of the nobodies. And it felt like, again, okay, I got to figure out what I want, because there's a lot of different ways to approach medical school. Do I want to really work super hard where I want to score super well and do everything super well so that I can get into a competitive specialty? Because that's the very near future of stress that you have to deal with. Or, I'm going to get through, I'm going to have a good time, I'm going to learn. Maybe I'll be competitive, maybe I won't. I think I was more somewhere in the middle of that, leaning towards wanting to be competitive. The only time I think I became kind of obsessive was during step 1. It was still graded for us. And honestly, med school is far more of a grind in terms of just sheer hours rather than juggling and this feeling of I don't know if this is going to work out. Undergrad's is this going to work? And you're hopeful that you'll get an A in this class. And I hope this freaking professor doesn't just do something crazy on this exam. Med school is less of that, in my opinion. It's more investment of sheer amount of time. Some people need less time than others, but everyone's going to need to put a lot of time. And I think it's getting good at shaving down how much time you need, but everyone's going to need to put a lot of time. Even the smartest people put hundreds of hours. You may do hundreds more depending on where you're at. For me, in my mind, it became more clear okay, I just give X number of investment and I will get outcome. I reminded myself again that I can do this after I had all this imposterism. I think imposterism is a recurring thing. So I did well in step 1. I did really well. I was not doing research. I was not doing all the other things to be super competitive.
What were you thinking about in terms of doing specialty at that?
Medicine kind of just felt right. It felt it's everything, know? So, part of it was I couldn't figure out necessarily where I felt the most close to medicine, just kind of felt all of it.
Ayman was doing well. He had good scores. But somewhere in the background of this period, and it had been true all along, was a quiet disadvantage he hadn't been able to fully compensate for. The kind of disadvantage that doesn't show up in a GPA. One of the things we were talking about, at least with the Minority Association of Pre-Medical Students, is just shadowing experiences was the big barrier.
I'm happy to talk about that too.
And it's much easier if your parents are doctors or if your friends' families doctors, because I think a lot of these shadowing experiences happen informally. So if you do come from a background where you don't have connections, that is just one of the additional hurdles.
Yeah, I will say for sure that was the weakest part of my application. And one of the areas I was most stressed about. I was able to shadow in a family medicine clinic. I was not substantive. I know it's become more competitive and this has become more heavily something that they're looking for, at least from my conversations with different people I've mentored over time. Really wanting a diversified experience, a lot of hours, not just shadowing, but kind of you're actually doing something.
So then I guess what's most helpful from your story is that it is a barrier.
It is a barrier.
And then depending on your access or your family connections, that barrier becomes a bigger one.
You have to really try hard. And I would say like there's certain things you can't get around. So a lot of this stuff, I think part of it is acknowledging your privileges and lack of privileges. And sometimes that can be empowering in itself, making that part of your story. It's not the story necessarily, you still have to show you interested and care and like it should make sense that you want to do this. It's important to acknowledge this for yourself. And it helps set some of the expectation of it is going to be hard. And it's just the reality. Everything in our society is inequitable and unfair. Everything. So the sooner that is apparent and accepted, the more you know what you're signing up for. And there are alternatives. And I think for me, I accept that there were alternatives to this and that there are people that are far more prepared to just thrive. I think knowing early on, okay, I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to probably search much earlier. So rather than starting to look for shadowing experiences in my second or third year, I should probably start first year. I might need to take time to actually find more of that stuff. So I think just being realistic and forgiving with yourself that like, because you already don't fit the mold, you're not going to fit the mold, accepting that, and then giving yourself the forgiveness and grace to kind of find how that is actually going to work out. If it works out and everything's seamless and there's no gaps and whatever, great, good for you. But if it's not feeling like the smoothest way of doing things, allow yourself that. Because what I've seen in other people is, and even myself, pushing through and really trying to force something and really just trying to go through a process as if you have no challenges that are different than anyone else. Really, I mean, first of all, it's just mentally destabilizing. It sucks. You're gaslighting yourself in a way. Because when you don't succeed and you haven't acknowledged that like there's different limitations, different hardships, then you're never going to feel okay with that failure. I think contextualizing that for yourself, I could have maybe been successful if I did things a little bit differently, knowing the challenges.
So what you're actually really advocating for is a very realistic perspective and say, the playing field is inequitable. Be honest about where you're coming from and what things you have control over. And give yourself enough grace to say, the way that I need to approach things is going to be different than some other people in a different situation. And that's completely acceptable. And it might be more difficult. It might be less straightforward, but it's equally reasonable. So going in eyes wide open.
I think so. For me, absolutely. I balanced things that I didn't have access to or privilege to. My privilege is already like, I am white appearing. My parents pushed me very hard. So that kind of was instilled in me, even when I didn't have it myself. I definitely had the feeling of fire underneath me in terms of I need to do well regardless because I don't have money. And so money's going to run out. And so even when I didn't have the motivation, that was a motivator. Those are things that benefited me. I think I balanced things by where I didn't have access to shadowing or testing resources or the actual experience of what it means to be a doctor. I compensated with trying to work very hard and then trying to be very authentic. I didn't like water down my story, but I shared my story not in an entirely raw way, which may not always be received 100% well. Really kind of thinking about your identity, thinking about your experiences, and actually like how does that translate to why that manifests as being a doctor, as being meaningful. For me, I experienced a lot of suffering and hardship, and that gives me life.
That sense of purpose, something Ayman had found slowly and almost reluctantly, was about to get a sharper definition. Between his first and second years of medical school, he did something that gave the vague idea of becoming a healer a much more specific shape. He went to Jordan.
I was in a focus track in community engagement. It was called Community Engagement Pathway. And that was a combination of global and rural health. I spent time after my first year of medical school as part of the track. I did 6 weeks working in an internship at the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees, so UNRWA, in Amman, Jordan. I have some Arabic I'm familiar with. I'm not fluent. You got like basically an Airbnb. It's just like a random building with 3 other people from my medical school group. You Uber, kind of navigating around, being in a place you've never been before. They had us start working on a qualitative project, interviewing Palestinian refugees who came from Syria into Jordan after the Syrian crisis to assess how their experience was transferring services from UNRWA in Syria to UNRWA in Jordan. Discrimination, poverty, lack of access to resources, et cetera, et cetera. So interviewing staff, what they perceived, the challenges and hardships. So it was interesting. I had this really interesting group of folks who had already worked, people that had established themselves in academic medicine, but would say things that you don't typically hear in academic medicine. They were talking about capitalism. They were talking about inequity. They were talking about privilege. They were talking about colonialism. They were talking about United States empire, all these kind of aspects that you typically don't see infused a lot of times. It's becoming more so accepted and part of conversations as these things become more accepted in broader culture. But for me at that time, I was like, this is really cool. These people, they care a lot.
And that's the first time you're getting exposed to that kind of...
I got exposed to that stuff a little bit in college, kind of exposure to politics with Bernie Sanders and all this stuff and kind of these conceptions of things. And I already had my own lived experience, which for me always felt not aligned with the current power structure of the United States, both politically and economically. But these experiences in medical school, these kind of formal lectures, these professors, these people are speaking to my experience, the things that I care about. So I carry that forward. And when I was interviewing, I really wanted to go somewhere that had a global health program or global health experience. I really wanted to keep doing the experiences overseas in global health.
Global health had become the organizing principle of Ayman's sense of where he was headed. And when it came to apply for residency, he built his entire list around it. He also, for the first time, allowed him to be selective because his scores gave him that option.
Fortunately, I had good scores and I didn't want to just go anywhere. I was selective. There was places where I felt like I would be okay going to, and I could see myself potentially being happy. I applied, I think, to ultimately 26 or 36 total, which was on the lower end than a lot of people. I wanted to be by the sea and I wanted to leave the South. I was tired of hurricanes. I was tired of highways and roads and lack of public infrastructure. I really wanted to go somewhere that had a global health program.
Stanford had exactly what Ayman was looking for. His standalone, well-funded global health track built into their internal medicine residency. You could be trained as an internist and have your entire experience shaped around global health work. They could send you anywhere. It was, on paper, the exact program Ayman had been orienting toward. There was just one problem.
I got interviewed at Stanford, I got interviewed at UW, and I got interviewed at Vanderbilt. Those were my top three. All of them had global health programs. I ended up ranking Stanford first, even though I didn't feel like I related the best to the people there and the experiences and kind of the nature of the interviews. But they had a very robust global health program. It was its own track, very well funded. So I ended up ranking Stanford, Vanderbilt, and then UW 1, 2, 3. And I remember getting the match results and I got ranked to here, obviously. I remember being sad initially, disappointed. And I remember getting the phone call from program director, Ken Steinberg, and I was very surprised that he called me. It was very genuine person, I think is the best way to describe him. I remember he was letting me know, hope you can join us later today when we all get to meet each other over Zoom, and we're going to do this later as a kind of hurrah. And I think he cried, he cried in that first initial, I don't even know this guy. I don't know anyone on this phone call here. And he cried. He shared some poetry, cried. I was like, oh, wow. I love this. And I remember it didn't take long after I got here. And the funny thing is, when I first was looking at residency programs, I liked Seattle. And it was initially on the top of my list. But as I became more focused on trying to find the place that met my ambitions, and I felt oh, wow, I have these scores, I have these things that have potential. And I really want to ambition match now my career, sort of think about these things. And ultimately, looking back, I'm so glad that didn't work out. That different way of me doing things where I was really focused on the future and the career and all these things rather than listening to my gut, because I think I would have been miserable at both those places. Great places, but I think this was not a match for me at the time.
And your personality is well suited for here, right?
I think so. Everyone is kind of very just authentic in a way and themselves. And I immediately just kind of felt very comfortable. And I felt this was right.
Ayman arrived at UW having wanted to be somewhere else. Seattle ended up being the right place for him to discover what he actually wanted.
I remember having Harborview as a rotation on the wards in my first year. And I remember I felt very aligned. The mission and the kind of patients that we're caring for, the people and the things that I was hearing espoused, things that people cared about, the way that we treated patients, for me really stood out. And as I was having these experiences, I was really just falling in love with actually working really hard, finding out what kind of doctor I wanted to be, like what that looked like for me. And I tell interns, that's your goal for a first year. Like you're focusing on that. Everyone's going to learn things. You're going to continue to learn things, and you're going to osmotically improve and get better and know things more over time. Like, don't worry about that. You're supposed to be wrong. It's really weird if you were right about a lot of things, because why would you know everything perfectly? Medicine is hard because there's a lot of seemingly right answers to every kind of thing. But you're really kind of figuring out your identity, what kind of doctor you want to be, and how you want to practice, how you want to talk to patients, how you want to do all these things, how it makes you feel. And I think it's a very emotional experience. And if it's not an emotional experience, I think there's something missing potentially. It really should be challenging you. It should be pulling at you. It is hard. It's hard seeing people die. It's great when you see them get well. It's harder when you see them get sick again, or when people don't improve at all. You kind of really immerse yourself in that. I remember being disappointed that I didn't match to Stanford or whichever. This idea, like, wanting to be some global health doctor, that I didn't really have a good conception of what that even looked like. It faded away. I was like, I don't need to go somewhere else. Like, there's a lot of need here. This is where I need to put my focus first. I need to be a good doctor here. Like, I don't need to be running around, and no disrespect on people who are like doing that and where that makes sense in their journey. I think this is my journey. But for me, it didn't make a lot of sense anymore. My interest in what felt meaningful to me. And I'm still figuring that out.
Residency, then chief year. And with it, a different kind of test. Not the academic kind, the kind that involves your body and what happens when you have been working flat out for 20 years, and when just working harder is no longer the solution.
Part of being a chief was exploring more the reality of working as a doctor, but working from a very particular lens of professional development, having different types of responsibilities and roles, and then knowing how a system works. I really was curious about how the hospital operates, being on a different end of things in terms of actually delivering care. I'm glad I got this position being in quality and safety, because there's so much in it that I think is helping me grow as a human being and as a doctor professionally. I'm getting to talk and meet so many people. It's really humbling to reach out to an attending and talk to them about a potential mistake that was made. I'm just someone that graduated. They've been practicing for a decade plus or whatever number of years more than me. It's that's a humbling dynamic. I'm still figuring out my process. Like, I'm interested in pulmonary and critical care. I like being challenged by the patients who are very sick and where things feel bleak. But also there's interesting pathophysiology, like diseases. Also, we're sharing that space with people who are really trying to cope and understand what is happening to someone they love or themselves. I'm figuring out, I'm balancing it. I have things that have happened to me over residency that I've had to balance. I've come to understand that I have some chronic diseases. I have autoimmune disease and I have a sleep disorder. And those have been real things that I've had to reckon with. I can't do everything. And part of me, like, going through this whole process was like, as hard as I work, I can make things happen. And that's not true always. And I think coming back to, it's okay. I really love this thing. And I'm giving myself some time right now. I don't fit the timeline of going from residency into fellowship. I'm doing this chief year, which is already another year. My plan was then to do a year of hospitalist after chief year, to then apply end of chief year. I now have changed that to 2 years of hospitalist, because I want a full year of being a hospitalist without having to think at all about something different and making sure if I really want this or not, to go into specialization and do the whole interviewing and application process, which can be really hard and frustrating. I'm bringing up that point because I don't have everything figured out still, as glittery and maybe from the outside, like, oh, look at this super successful guy. I think there's been so many missteps and real big failures along the way, but you can still get to something that feels like it's right for you at the end of the day.
If there's a through line across everything Ayman has described, the bullying, the engineering wrong turns, the medical school culture shock, the match that didn't go as planned, the body that set its own limits, it's this. He did most of it without a map. And a lot of the extra difficulty came not from the obstacles themselves, but from not knowing they were coming. This brings us to the part of the conversation Ayman returns to: information, and who has access to it. So my question is, now if you look back on your younger self, who's even in undergrad, what advice would you have in terms of finding someone that could make life a little bit easier? because you did things a little bit the hard way. Are there specific things that you could think about? Because there's kids at home right now that are undergrads at University of Washington, a lot of places similar to you. They grew up in circumstances that were not ideal. They're working really hard. And then they just feel like things are stacked against them and they don't know the path forward.
Yeah. You know, part of me feels like this is exactly what I had to do to get here. Is I had to struggle like this. And part of this, there is a reality where it is going to be struggle. It is going to be hard because things are stacked against you. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means that there are a lot of things that are in the way, and there are many more people that have far more disadvantages, hardships that I don't. One thing I'm learning now, and now that I have the ability to talk with people more, it's something I haven't done well in my life. And I think that's part of this experience of growing up without having people in your life talking to you. And this idea of mentorship is such, actually, I think, a huge thing. It is like a very unique thing. And the concept of mentorship and like being very open to that, I had a mentality that I think other people who come from similar backgrounds of having to work really hard and struggle through things and push and, effort, you don't let people help you. I definitely have a hard time receiving help. I think accepting that you need help and then how to get help. Many times I didn't realize I needed help. There were times that I knew I needed it, but I didn't know how to get it, and then acting on it. So there's so many aspects to that. How do I be successful in undergrad? How do I get this experience? How do I get into medical school? I think what actually will serve you well is really being honest about what are the hardships? What are the things that you don't necessarily have access to easily? I think once you recognize what your hardships, limitations, whatever you want to call it is, then okay, this is where I need to be strategic. If this is really what your goal early on is, I want to be a doctor, whatever it is, pharmacist, nurse, it honestly doesn't matter. I think one thing I wish early on, and which I tried to help my brothers, is seeking a real mentor, which is someone who agrees in this partnership to continue helping, and it's not equal. They're giving you a lot to mentor you, but a true mentor who is like willing to give the time and energy and invest and keep dropping ladders for you to climb up on. That's hard to find. It may not be present for a while, but I think really pushing yourself to ask questions early on. Like, it doesn't matter. Don't be shy. Like, ask people like, hey, I'm really curious. I'm so-and-so. I'd like to kind of at least hear what it's like for you to be a doctor or what it's like being a nurse. There's formal ways to do that. A lot of people, they have a family or a friend or someone make that connection and do that for them. But, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to reach out. I think there's lots of ways where like people show interest and they email. Let's say you're someone in high school or undergrad and you email one of the people whose emails are available online as like a reach out. And you say, hi, I'm very interested. And you show like this genuine interest. I find it hard to believe that people would not actually connect you with the right person. And you may not get access, but you actually will get information potentially. You might get to meet someone. And at least you've made a connection in someone's mind. I think I really would have benefited early on from just information. I think what we're talking about a lot is information. There's a lot of people that get handed information, but the sooner you understand that, okay, what I really need to do, yes, the grades and all these things, what I really need to do is look who could be people that give me information. And that might be a little bit of a protracted process. You might start with someone that you think could help you. And then they like maybe give you some things and then be like, actually, you need to talk to this person. And eventually, after a few iterations, you might find the right person.
No, I think that's exactly right.
You might find me.
Yeah.
You might find Duncan.
Yeah. And I think I'm notoriously bad at responding to email. Yeah. I think and when I was a young person, I was crestfallen when someone wouldn't respond to my email. Yeah. But what I'm realizing is that there's such a low barrier and it's fine to re-say and say, hey, just bringing this to the top of your inbox. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And what I now realize being in this role is there's nothing personal. Yeah. The person is just very busy. Yeah. And if you're persistent enough, I don't think I ever view it as being annoying. I'm just like, oh, thanks for giving me the opportunity to respond. Mm. And I really do have the best intentions and I really do want to connect. And then maybe I'm not always the best doing that, but I think a lot of doctors feel that way. And if if there's an opportunity to connect with someone that's put in their lap, they would love it.
Yeah. What I would say to the other situations where like trying to connect with someone and they're not very nice about it or whatever kind of negative interaction, then that clearly was not going to be constructive anyway. So
It saved you.
Yeah. Okay, next, like that's not going to be the experience every time. So
Yeah.
you might as well shoot your shot. Like literally cannot harm you.
The information Ayman is describing isn't the kind you find in a catalog or a guidebook. It's the stuff that gets passed quietly from one person to the next, if you happen to know the right person. And that hints at the hidden curriculum.
Yeah.
Because there's the syllabus. I mean, all these med school syllabi, I think, are on paper. But then the real experience of being on the wards, of understanding how the power dynamics work, that's a completely different thing, right? That there's very few things that are written out that explain that.
I mean, just think about like any of the times where you're about to start something new. And if you have, a friend or someone, you reach out before the rotation starts or before anything starts and you say, hey, mind if we chat on the phone quick or like, walk me through like what this is like. And that's real life. When you start a new position, hopefully the person that you're taking over from will sit down with you and give you a real, it's not on the computer, it's not on the document, it's not on the email, but it's like we're going to have coffee and we're going to like talk about this is the reality of like this.
And maybe that's what mentorship really is giving you the lowdown information that's not written down.
You still have to do all the work and you still have to figure it out. But, it is helpful to be like, okay, I'm just letting you know right now that although it is how it looks online, but you really need to actually have your stuff ready like 3-4 months actually ahead of this, et cetera, et cetera. Someone who doesn't know all these things, you're going to come to find like, it's not going to work out because I didn't know this.
Yeah. And I think framing it in terms of how can you get information, because there's certain types of information that is not readily accessible in formal avenues. And what you need to know is what do you really need to do to get to the next step, right?
Yeah.
And that's the question. And then certain people have access to that information and certain people don't. Information is the key to forming your path.
Yeah.
And then there's a hard way of doing it, like you did. You did the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
You point out that maybe that was the only way that it was going to work out for you anyways. But then there's even small ways to be a little bit more strategic.
Yeah. And there's always going to be some blood. There's always going to be some sweat. There's going to be tears, And I think part of that is just human development, it's the experience. And like, those aren't bad things when those are happening. And there are opportunities to be growing and improving and reflecting. But probably you don't have to go through all of it, And I'm still putting myself through some things. I'm learning finally how to advocate for myself more. Part of that process, like that, when you grow up, I don't know what it is, but I know what it is.
You're kind of not entitled. You don't feel
not entitled. Yeah. I think just you don't really have that ability to really advocate for yourself. It doesn't feel natural.
Because you don't feel like you belong. It's the same thing that you mentioned.
Feel like you belong.
You feel like, you're this chief now, and you still feel you're not entitled to all the privileges of this position that someone else from a different background would say, of course I'm entitled to these, even if I'm not a chief.
Yeah.
Even if I'm just some intern.
Yeah. And I think that's just part of the longitudinal process of when you enter these spaces.
But part of it's cultural too, though, right? That part of it is the humility of different cultures.
For sure.
Which don't allow that. And you see it at play all the time in medical education.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of interfacing dynamics behind these things.
Yeah. And becoming aware of them. And like what you were saying, it's the hard stuff is like understanding what you need and where you are. And those are not painless things to go through.
Yeah.
But they're going to pay off the biggest dividends. Because wherever you go, you're going to be there.
Exactly.
So the sooner you figure out what makes yourself tick, the better off you're going to be. Because you have quirks, I guarantee it. But as long as you can be aware of them and anticipate them, that can help you a lot. That exchange about entitlement, cultural humility, and what it costs to spend years not quite believing you belong in the rooms you've worked to enter might be the most honest part of our conversation.
And finding, who are your advocates. There's those connections that like, this person has power, this person has the ability to help me. But then, you might find people, you were one of those people to me, like, it wasn't necessarily that you were going to elevate me in terms of like status or like, privilege, but you as an individual, you, Duncan, showed me like someone who was themselves, like you was authentic, and showed me that was like a real thing that was possible, like that you exist And you're
in medicine.
In medicine, and your act of being yourself was important. So I think like finding those people and just reminding yourself of them.
Which was not tolerated in medical school. When I went to medical school, they did not appreciate that. They still don't appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think, it's still harder to make that space for yourself, but you just have to be aware like what you need. I'm glad I'm here, and I would be having a little bit different time than at another place. And that's
but you would still make it work
change.
though. Knowing you would still make it work.
Still would find that nook or cranny.
And if you didn't get into med school, you'd still make it work too.
Yeah.
Dr. Ayman Youssef is a chief resident in internal medicine at Harborview Medical Center, where he runs the department's Morbidity and Mortality Conference and works in quality and safety. He's planning to pursue a fellowship in pulmonary and critical care on his own timeline, on his own terms. If you're somewhere on the road he described in these 2 episodes, pre-med, medical school, residency, or just trying to find your footing in a system that wasn't built with you in mind, a few things from Ayman worth carrying with you. Information is a real currency. The playing field is uneven, and acknowledging that isn't an excuse. It's a map, and being yourself, consistently, in rooms that weren't designed for you, helps everyone who comes after you. Thank you to Dr. Ayman Youssef for giving us his time and sharing his story. This has been the EthnoMed podcast. I'm Duncan Reed. To learn more about the communities and clinicians doing cross-cultural care in the Pacific Northwest and beyond, visit ethnomed.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend.